I I think you have the wrong address.
No, Diana Reeves. I've been looking for you for 10 years.
Diana Reeves had not slept in 3 days, not because she couldn't close her eyes, but because every time she did, she saw the same thing: two children, a pink backpack, and a door that no longer belonged to her family. It was 8:09 on a Thursday in March, and the apartment at 22 Chesapeake Row looked like the inside of a decision that had already been made. Moving boxes lined the hallway. Amara's crayon drawings still hung on the refrigerator because Diana hadn't been able to take them down. Some things you pack, some things you can't touch without breaking. The eviction officer was scheduled between 8 and 10. Diana had been standing in the hallway for 20 minutes, still in her last shift's gray sweatshirt, holding coffee she had stopped drinking, not crying, past crying, in that place beyond tears where everything goes quiet and the only thing left is the waiting. The knock came at 8:14, not the knock she was expecting. An eviction officer knocks like the law: flat, official, recorded. This was different. 3 knocks, even and unhurried, from someone who had nowhere else to be and had chosen to be here. Diana moved to the peephole and went completely still. The man on the porch wore a burgundy suit. He wasn't holding paperwork. He wasn't holding anything. Behind him, 3 black SUVs idled across the narrow street. 4 men in dark jackets stood on the sidewalk in a line, hands clasped in front of them, watching the house with the quiet attention of people paid to watch things that matter. Diana's hand found the deadbolt. She stood there for 6 full seconds. Then she opened the door. The man looked at her and said her name, not as a question, not as a greeting, but the way you say a name you've been carrying for 10 years and have finally found the right moment to put down. She had never seen this man before in her life, but he already knew everything about hers, and what he had come to do would not begin to make sense until she understood what happened on one single night, a decade ago, that neither of them had ever forgotten. Diana Reeves had learned to count before she learned to rest. Not numbers, margins. The difference between what came in and what went out. Tracked in a small notebook she kept in the kitchen drawer, next to the utility scissors and the takeout menus she never ordered from anymore. 9 years at St. Luke's Medical Center. Overnight rotation, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., 4 nights a week, because the overnight differential paid $2.40 more per hour. And $2.40 over 4 nights, times 50 weeks, was the number that kept Marcus in school shoes and Amara in the asthma medication that insurance only partially covered. She was 38 years old. She had not taken a single vacation day in 4 years. She had not bought herself new shoes in 14 months. The ones she wore to work had a small separation starting at the left toe that she sealed every 3 weeks with a tube of shoe glue she kept under the bathroom sink. Terrell left in the spring of 2021. He didn't leave with drama. He left the way water drains, gradually, then all at once. One night he didn't come home. The next morning, his drawer was empty. 3 weeks later, a letter arrived from a lawyer in Prince George's County. No child support arrangement. No forwarding address. Marcus was 5 years old. Amara was 2. Diana gave herself one weekend to feel it. Then she picked up a second job delivering groceries on Saturday mornings. And she kept going because her children were watching. And the only thing she was absolutely certain of was that they were not going to watch her stop. For 3 years, 22 Chesapeake Row had been $1,100 a month, and a place where the children knew which step creaked and where the nightlight was and which drawer in the kitchen stuck when it rained. In September 2024, a letter arrived from Meridian Property Group. Effective November 1st, rent would increase to $1,650. No explanation, no contact name. Diana called the number on the letterhead 4 times over 2 weeks. Nobody called back. She wrote a letter. It was not answered. She called Baltimore City's tenant hotline and was placed on a callback list that never resolved. She paid what she could: $1,100 in November, $900 in December, $700 in January, because by January, Marcus needed a winter coat, and Amara's ear infection medication cost $87 out of pocket, and the $700 was what was left when both of those things were handled. By February, Meridian had filed for eviction, 60 days' notice. Those 60 days ended yesterday. And when Diana opened her door to a man in a burgundy suit with 3 black SUVs parked across her street, she had $340 in her account, 2 sleeping children in the back room, and no plan that reached past this morning. What she did not have, and could not have known she needed, was the answer to a question she had never thought to ask. Why did this man know her name? Baltimore. November 9th, 2014. Diana Reeves was 28 years old and working the late shift at the Cornerstone Diner on North Avenue, the kind of place that existed in the hours between midnight and 4 a.m., when the city had nowhere else to put its people. Vinyl booths the color of old mustard, a jukebox in the corner that hadn't worked since 2009, but nobody had removed because it filled the space. The smell of burned coffee and griddle grease so deep in the walls it had become the walls. Diana had been on her feet since 6 that evening. She had $37 in tips in her apron pocket, a nursing textbook in her locker she needed to finish a chapter of before class on Friday, and a left knee that had been aching since October from standing on a concrete floor 8 hours a night, 4 nights a week. It was 11:47 when the door opened, and the cold came in with him. He was young, mid-20s, dark suit, one sleeve torn at the shoulder seam in the way fabric tears when someone has grabbed it hard. He was pressing a folded cocktail napkin to the left side of his face, above the eyebrow, and the napkin was dark, and he moved like a man working very hard to appear normal. Each step controlled, deliberate, the effort visible only if you were paying attention. Diana was paying attention. She paid attention to everyone who came in after midnight, because the ones who came in after midnight were always carrying something. He took the last booth by the emergency exit. He did not pick up a menu. He did not look around the room. He placed both hands flat on the table and looked at the wall and breathed. Diana brought him water without being asked. She set it down and stepped back and watched him from the counter for 4 minutes. He did not reach for the glass immediately. He just let his hands rest around it, the way you hold something when you are not drinking it, but need the weight of it in your hands. She went to the supply closet and retrieved the first aid kit, the one kept above the mop bucket for kitchen accidents. She brought it to the table. She did not ask what happened. She did not ask his name. She put on a pair of latex gloves from her apron pocket, the ones she carried from her nursing program, and she cleaned the cut above his eyebrow and closed it with 3 butterfly strips placed end to end. 3/4 of an inch. She had it done in 90 seconds. He held completely still and watched her work with the expression of someone encountering something unfamiliar. Not the help itself, but the fact that it came without a question attached. She ordered him eggs, wheat toast, and black coffee from the kitchen and paid for it herself. $8.40 from the 37 in her apron. He tried to return the money. She wouldn't take it. He asked why. She looked at him without hesitation and said, "Because you needed it and I had it." He sat in that booth until 2 a.m. She checked on him every 20 minutes without being asked. When he finally stood and put on his jacket, he walked out the door without a word. No name, no number, no explanation. Diana cleared the booth, wiped it down, and went back to the counter. She did not think about it again. She had a chapter to finish and a knee that needed ice and a shift starting again in 48 hours. She filed it the way you file small acts of ordinary kindness, not as something significant, but as simply what a person does when another person is sitting alone in a booth after midnight with shaking hands and nowhere else to go. She had no idea she had just become the reason a very dangerous man decided to stay alive. Dante Reyes was born in June 1985 in a row house on Conkling Street in Highlandtown, the East Baltimore neighborhood where his father Carlo ran a numbers operation that served 6 square blocks and never troubled anyone who didn't want trouble. His mother Isabella cooked sofrito on Sunday mornings and kept a photograph of San Miguel Arcangel above the kitchen stove, and told Dante, from the time he was old enough to understand words, that the difference between a man and an animal was the debts he chose to honor. Carlo Reyes was shot in the parking lot of a carryout on Pulaski Highway in October 1999. Dante was 14 years old. He stood at his father's grave in a suit 2 sizes too large and understood 3 things simultaneously: that the men who ran East Baltimore were not going to hand anything to a child, that nobody was coming to help him, and that his mother's photograph of San Miguel was going to need a bigger wall. He spent 5 years learning everything Carlo had not had time to teach him. He made mistakes. He survived them. He took over at 19 and spent the next 18 years building something his father never had. Not a corner, not a crew, but a structure. Invisible from the outside, precise from within. By 2024, Dante Reyes operated across real estate, logistics, and port contracts in ways that touched 3 city council seats and 2 federal procurement offices and could not be proven in any courtroom that had ever been convened. He was not known publicly. That was the architecture. The men who needed to know his name already knew it. Everyone else was safer in the dark. The night of November 9th, 2014, was the closest Dante had come to dying since he stood at Carlo's grave. He had walked into a meeting on North Avenue at 11 p.m. that had been presented to him as neutral ground. It was not neutral ground. It was an ending that someone else had planned for him. He took 2 wounds, one in the left side where a rib redirected the blade by a margin his surgeon later described as extraordinary luck, and one across the left eyebrow, where there was no rib to help him. He walked out through a side door and moved south on foot for 6 blocks until the only light he could find was a diner on North Avenue with a handwritten hour sign in the window and the smell of griddle grease coming through the door. He did not expect to be helped. He sat in the last booth because it had a sight line to the exit, and he needed a wall behind him, and he needed to stop moving before his body made the decision for him. What happened next was not something he had calculated. A woman in a diner apron with latex gloves in her pocket and no interest in asking questions sat across from him and closed a wound on his face with 3 butterfly strips and paid $8.40 for his food out of the money in her apron, and looked at him when he asked why, and said, "Because you needed it, and I had it." Dante Reyes had spent his entire adult life in rooms where everything had a price and everyone had a motive. He had never once encountered a sentence like that one. He had never once believed it was possible to encounter a sentence like that one. He found her name 3 days later through the diner's payroll records. Diana Reeves, nursing student, overnight shift, North Avenue location. He wrote it on a plain piece of paper and put it in the drawer of his desk at the office on Boston Street. Every year after that, one man in his organization ran a quiet check. No contact, no interference, the way you monitor something precious from a respectful distance. He knew about Terrell. He knew about the second job. He knew about St. Luke's and the overnight differential and Marcus's school enrollment and Amara's recurring ear infections and the shoe blue under the bathroom sink. He did not intervene. The code his mother had taught him was specific on this point. Gratitude inserted into someone's life without their knowledge or consent was not gratitude. It was control wearing a different jacket. You waited. You watched. You honored the debt when the debt became real. In February 2025, the report came across his desk on a Tuesday morning. Meridian Property Group, 22 Chesapeake Row. Fraudulent eviction filing. a lease violation time-stamped 4 days before Meridian's own maintenance logs recorded any related complaint, a discrepancy that invalidated the legal foundation of the entire 60-day notice. Diana did not have a lawyer. Meridian knew she did not have a lawyer. Gerald Fitch had been running this same operation across 14 West Baltimore buildings for 3 years and had never once been legally challenged because the people he targeted never had the time or the resources to challenge him. Dante read the report. He did not make phone calls. He did not send anyone. He looked at the address and the date, 48 hours until the eviction officer arrived, and he stood up from his desk, put on the burgundy jacket, and got in the car himself, because Isabella Reyes had told him once that some debts were too important to pay through other people. And the woman who had closed the wound above his left eyebrow without asking a single question was not a debt he was willing to settle through an intermediary. Diana told him he had the wrong address. She said it the way you say something when you need it to be true more than you believe it is. He said he did not. Same tone, same stillness, not aggressive, certain, the way a man is certain when he has driven 2 hours and checked the address 4 times and already knows what he is going to say before the door opens. He reached into the inside pocket of the burgundy jacket. Diana's hand moved to the door frame. Behind her, Marcus appeared in the hallway. 9 years old, school backpack already on one shoulder, shoes already tied, because Marcus had learned in the last 3 days to be ready to move at any moment. He stood in the hallway and looked at the man in the suit and the men on the sidewalk with the careful, measuring attention of a child who has spent 4 years watching his mother carry things alone and has started, without anyone asking him to watch her back. Diana turned and told him quietly to go to the kitchen. He went, but she heard him stop just inside the doorway, close enough to hear, and she did not send him further because some part of her understood that what was about to happen was something her son needed to know existed in the world. Dante's hand came out of the jacket, holding a single piece of paper, folded in quarters. He unfolded it slowly. It was a photograph, printed from a security camera still, grainy, time-stamped in the bottom left corner, November 9th, 2014, 11:53 p.m. A diner booth. A man with a dark napkin pressed to his face. A woman in an apron, leaning across the table with her hands steady and her attention complete. The woman's face was turned at a slight angle toward the camera. Clear enough. Diana looked at the photograph for a long time. Then she looked up at the man's face, at the thin, straight scar above his left eyebrow, 3/4 of an inch, running exactly where 3 butterfly strips would have been placed, end to end. She said, "That was you." He said, "That was me." Neither of them spoke for 11 seconds. The street behind him was quiet. One of the SUVs idled. Somewhere down Chesapeake Row, a dog was barking at something it couldn't reach. Then Dante told her about Gerald Fitch. He told her about Meridian Property Group and the 14 buildings and the shell company registered in Delaware and the fraudulent maintenance logs and the falsified violation timestamps and the 11 other families who had already lost homes they should never have lost. He told her the eviction notice she had received was not legal. It only appeared legal because Meridian had spent 3 years learning exactly how much paperwork it took to make something illegal look inevitable to someone without a lawyer and without time. He had the documents, every file, every discrepancy. He had been watching Meridian for 4 months, not because of her, but because Meridian's principal investor had financial ties to a port logistics contract that ran through Dante's operations. And what Clarence, his forensic accountant, had found inside Meridian's books was not just fraud against tenants, it was a pattern, documented, dated, prosecutable. Diana looked at him for a long time. Then she asked the only question she had. "What do you want in return?" Dante held her gaze and did not hesitate for even 1 second. "Nothing," he said, "but I need you to trust me for 48 hours." Diana looked at the scar above his eye. She looked back at her apartment, the boxes, the drawings on the refrigerator, Marcus in the kitchen doorway pretending not to listen. Then she looked at Dante Reyes and said the two words that changed everything: "Prove it." Diana did not let him inside. She made him wait on the porch. She closed the door, walked to the kitchen table, and sat down. Marcus was standing in the doorway with his backpack still on and his shoes still tied, and his eyes asking a question his mouth was too careful to say out loud. Diana looked at her son for a long moment. She did not explain what was happening. She did not tell him everything was fine, because Marcus was 9 years old and had been watching his mother's face for 4 years and would have known immediately that fine was not the word for this. She just looked at him the way mothers look at their children when they are making a decision that will determine what kind of world that child grows up believing in. Dante's attorney filed an emergency injunction against the eviction at 6 p.m. that same Thursday. The filing cited a single catastrophic discrepancy in Meridian's documentation, a lease violation timestamped 4 days before Meridian's own maintenance records showed any related complaint had been received, logged, or investigated. That discrepancy did not just weaken the eviction notice, it invalidated it entirely. A secondary filing went simultaneously to the Baltimore City Housing Authority, documenting Meridian Property Group's systematic pattern across all 14 properties: falsified notice timelines, accepted rent payments recorded after violations were supposedly filed, manufactured inspection reports. Gerald Fitch received a call from his own attorney at 6:52 Friday morning. The injunction held by 9 a.m. The eviction officer did not come. Diana Reeves did not lose her home. Not because a powerful man decided to be generous, because the truth was already there, documented and dated, and waiting for someone who knew how to use it. And for the first time in 3 years of Gerald Fitch's operation across 14 buildings, someone showed up with both the evidence and the 48 hours left to matter. The boxes stayed in the hallway, but nobody was carrying them out. 3 weeks later, 22 Chesapeake Row looked almost the same as it always had. The boxes were still in the corner, not all unpacked, because Diana had learned not to confuse saved with permanent. Amara's drawings were still on the refrigerator. Marcus was doing homework at the kitchen table in the spot where the overhead light hit best. The left toe of Diana's work shoes had separated again, and the tube of shoe glue was back under the bathroom sink, where it always lived. Some things change completely. Most things just quietly continue. Dante Reyes did not come back. He sent a letter instead. 3 sentences, handwritten on plain white paper. The debt was settled. He hoped the children were well. Nothing else. Diana read it twice at the kitchen table, then folded it and placed it in the drawer where she kept her grandmother's recipe cards. The same drawer where she kept the things that mattered but had no frame. She wrote back one line on a piece of notepaper and gave it to the man who had delivered the letter. "You were never in debt to me." She never heard from Dante again. $8.40, 3 butterfly strips, a sentence spoken without calculation because you needed it and I had it. Diana had not performed the kindness that night in 2014. She had simply stopped. In a world that had trained everyone around her to keep moving, she had looked at a man in a booth after midnight and stopped. 10 years later, her door was still hers because she did. If someone showed up for you the way Dante showed up for Diana, 10 years later with nothing to gain, would you open the door? Or would you stand there waiting for the catch? Drop your answer below. And if this story reminded you of someone who showed up when nobody else did, send it to them tonight. Subscribe. The next one will find you when you need it.